Hello and welcome to the Bald Ambition podcast. I am your bald host, Mookie Spitz, and the one with ambition today is Mr. Dale Cooke. He is president of Philly Cooke Consulting, FDA ad law. I had you on less than 2 weeks ago, and we were talking about the Chinese blessing and curse of living in interesting times. And I would venture to assume as of last week that the times have gotten even more interesting. So I want to thank you for coming back on, and let's roll our sleeves up and try to figure out exactly what's going on with the Maha Make America's Children strategy that was unfolded and its consequences to DTC marketing and communications. We know a multi-billion-dollar spend year to year, and I've been getting calls. I'm sure you've been getting them. Everyone wants to know what now and what next.
Yeah, thank you, Spitz. Thanks for having me back on. And as I said last time, I tried to be very cautious when we last spoke of saying, like, I'm talking to you about things as of this moment when we are recording, because things are changing so rapidly that I don't know what's going to be happening in a day or two. And I'm not, feeling confident that I know what's going to happen. And sure enough, something happened, right? And something happened that was significant. It's not often that I get New York Times alerts on my phone that are directly related to the advertising and promotion of prescription drugs. But as I was sitting there watching the Phillies on Tuesday night, that's exactly what happened, right? My phone, first off, I got a text from a client saying, boy, you must be busy. And then I got the New York Times alert seconds later, and I then understood why my client was reaching out to me. So let's start, I guess, with what we know as of this minute. Again, repeating a theme from last time, got to separate out the noise from the substance. So on Tuesday night and then Wednesday morning, the FDA put out a press release, a corresponding fact sheet, announcing the intention to significantly increase enforcement related to the DTC advertising of prescription drugs. This was done simultaneously with and clearly in conjunction with the release of what you already alluded to, the second Maha Make America Healthy Again report, which also included a brief paragraph about DTC advertising and the need to crack down on it. And so what exactly did FDA do? Well, they announced their intention to, one, drastically increase enforcement activity. As you and I know, and as the commissioner correctly pointed out in his announcement, back in the 1990s, there was significantly more enforcement from FDA related to the overall prescription drug advertising, not only DTC advertising, but HCP-directed communications as well. There was significantly more enforcement. And then beginning with the George Bush administration, George Bush the Younger, in 2000, there was an active effort to reduce that enforcement. The Bush administration came in, and there was a belief that FDA had sort of gotten out of hand and was doing too much enforcement, and certain steps were taken by that administration to reduce FDA enforcement. 8 years later, the Obama administration comes into office, and that, of course, in 2009 is the year that you and I know, sort of kicking off in large measure the focus on online internet communications, what was then in its infancy, social media, but was just sort of starting, And FDA declared, right, in March of that year, they released 14 letters on a single day and said, what's been going on is inappropriate. We're cracking down. And they put out a press release about it. So that's sort of the closest direct parallel and analog we have to what just happened, was this announcement of a massive, new enforcement. Now, differences between that announcement and this one: first off, when that happened, the letters that were immediately posted. So we all could immediately go to the FDA website, take a look at the letters, see what the concerns were that FDA was expressing, and figure out how to adjust our promotional activities to bring ourselves into alignment with the position of the new administration. This time around, as we are speaking on Friday morning, September 12, there are not yet any letters posted. And so the fact sheet from HHS said that there were at least a dozen. I don't remember whether it was the plural dozens or whether it just said at least a dozen FDA enforcement actions that were being taken. Scuttlebutt, just talking to people, yes, some people have gotten letters. And so there are people who have received those letters. But it's standard practice, has always been standard practice by FDA, to send out the letters and then post them a few days later. What the difference this time around is we're getting an announcement that the letters have been sent without then being able to see what the letters say. So the recipients have gotten them, and the rest of us are left sort of sitting here saying, okay, what specifically did FDA object to? The other new part, and none of my clients have received a letter, or at least none of my clients have told me that they received a letter. So I'm assuming that is true, that none of them have received it yet. But what I've heard about the letters is that they appear to be written by AI. Appear to be. And that was something the commissioner, talked about in the press release, was saying that FDA would be making use of AI as part of this increased enforcement. That, of course, is also radically different from what happened in 2009 or previously. There was no, so far as I'm aware, there was no use of AI in the monitoring or enforcement. So that increase in enforcement is a real thing. It's absolutely happened. And we're all now in, waiting mode to sort of, until those letters get posted, until we can read them. And even if you're a recipient of a letter, you received a letter. Presumably you didn't receive 2, 3, 4, or 5 letters. So even for those individual companies, they will want to see, how does our letter differ from what was said to our competitors? How does our letter compare, right? So that we can get a sense for FDA's overall enforcement priorities and thus bring ourselves into compliance. I hope that will happen soon. I was on the FDA website again this morning and didn't see those letters being posted. But again, maybe this afternoon they'll be posted. Maybe it will be, Wednesday morning, sort of a standard ordinary release, or maybe it'll happen at some other time,
Now,
who knows?
despite that, at least initial lack of immediate transparency, just for the sake of clarification, because I know a lot of people are listening and a lot of people are nervous, beneath those letters, to substantiate those letters, there haven't been any declared changes in the guidance itself. So specifically, they haven't necessarily become more stringent than they were before. No major seismic changes that would precipitate the letters being released now. Is that true or false?
We don't know. We have a declared intention to be more stringent. So in the commissioner's press release, he said that they are initiating a rulemaking process to remove what he referred to as the major statement loophole, or the adequate provision loophole, from the regulations. And so, I'm assuming most of your listeners are deeply ensconced in this, but for anybody who needs the reminder, the Code of Federal Regulations currently requires that in a broadcast ad, and there's some ambiguity about exactly what that phrase broadcast ad means, but for now, let's just think traditional linear television at the moment. In a broadcast ad, you must include a brief summary of all of the side effects, contraindications, etc., unless you make adequate provision for delivery of the directions for use. And it's that adequate provision part that enabled industry to increase its advertising on DTC.
Well, also, not to interrupt, but also truncate or summarize some of that list. If I understand it correctly, one of the changes or hints of change is a more comprehensive and exhaustive approach, even within broadcast television,
right,
for including the expansive adverse events.
And that's the brief summary. That's the brief summary requirement. So the second thing is the major statement requirement. And the major statement requirement is apparently not going to be changed. The major statement requirement says currently, and has always said, that your ad, regardless of whether you have the brief summary or not, must include a major statement of the side effects and contraindications for your product. So that major statement requirement is in addition to the adequate provision. It's not in lieu of. So that portion of your TV spot, which depending on the spot you're running and the particular drug you're working on, maybe you've got a 60-second spot and that's 20 seconds, 30 seconds, 5 seconds, 45 seconds, whatever the case may be. That portion apparently is not going to be affected by the announced changes. Instead, they're focusing on the adequate provision part. And the reason that matters is, again, if you don't make adequate provision for the dissemination of your directions for use, then you have to include the brief summary. The brief summary is a much, much longer, more extensive piece of information. And that information absolutely includes more information about side effects, etc. But back in the day, before FDA explained how you could make adequate provision via a website, a 800 number, etc., what people used to do was they would just scroll the brief summary ever so slowly on the TV ad. And that absolutely limited the amount of television advertising that pharmaceutical companies were doing, because it meant that they had to buy much, much longer TV spots. Note that it was via guidance in 1997, not a change in the regulations, despite what the commissioner said. It was via guidance in 1997 that FDA put forward their understanding of adequate provision to establish what we now know today as 4-part adequate provision. So if your TV ad includes 4 things, the call 1-800 number, ask your doctor, visit our website, or see our print ad, then you've met your 4-part adequate provision requirement. And so that's the thing that the commissioner announced the FDA is initiating a rulemaking process to remove. He could have just withdrawn the guidance about adequate provision from 1997. That would have created a much more immediate set of a bit of chaos, but for whatever reason didn't do that. I think probably there are legal reasons why he was be concerned that even if they withdrew the guidance, if people just continued to abide by that guidance, it would be really hard to, say in a court of law that, that was the company was violating the rules. So they're apparently going through the more lengthy process of rulemaking. Now, I say apparently going through a more lengthy process of rulemaking because the commissioner in this press release said, we're initiating a rulemaking process. Well, that phrase is ambiguous. what does that mean? Does that mean a bunch of lawyers are currently sitting down at the FDA to draft a new regulation? It doesn't mean that they immediately published a new draft regulation or a new update to the regulations, because at least as we're speaking today, that has not yet been published in the Federal Register. So that could happen again, could happen today, could happen on Monday. It might happen within the next year or two. I don't know, because, normally the standard process for rulemaking, it's lengthy. You can do it fairly rapidly. In the first Trump administration, for example, when they were taking on DTC pharmaceutical advertising, they managed to draft a rule, get it published, get comments, and get a final version of the rule in something like 9 months. That was a very, very rapid turnaround. By the way, that rule was then struck down by the courts because the courts said that the administration didn't have the legal authority for promulgating that rule in the first place. So when will that happen? What will they do? I don't know. And of course, until we actually see the proposal for the modification to the adequate provision rule, we don't know how to respond. We don't know if we're going to have to go back to the way things were in the 1980s when you had the scrolling brief summary on TV. Is that what people want? I find it hard to think that's what people want.
The sentiment, though, the writing on the DTC wall, going all the way up to Trump, who was, in a sense, overtly rebuking and talking about this notion of going to a website to provide safety information. Outrageous. So the sentiment behind all of this, in lieu of formalized new rules, is sending shudders throughout the industry. If you're an agency, if you're a pharmaceutical company, a healthcare company, you need to plan. There are campaigns that are in production at this moment. You need to look your art director in the eye, your copywriters, your legal experts, and everyone is asking, is this compliant? And to your point, even if it's compliant based on the rules now, how do we know it won't be a month from now? To your point, 9 months from now? How stringent will the enforcement be? No one wants a warning letter. But then you need to get campaigns out. What is the industry to do?
Yeah, and that's exactly why the inability right now to access the specific enforcement actions, the inability to access a specific proposal in the CFR for a revision. Right now, as we speak, those rules have not changed. Now, if you were a pharmaceutical company that was engaged in, what some people refer to as pushing the envelope strategies, then you need to sort of rethink your approach, because I think this clearly is saying those sorts of strategies are going to be subjected to enforcement. But if you were a pharmaceutical company that you looked in the mirror every day and you said, we are absolutely abiding by the regs as they are written, we are absolutely following the rules, then as we speak, as of this moment, the same rules apply. And so if you have been compliant up until this point, as of this moment, exactly the same rules apply. Apparently, allegedly, that is going to change at some point in the near future. So what do you do if you're developing that commercial spot right now? Well, you have to develop it at risk or choose to delay. Those are your two options.
That's what's freaking people out right now,
Yeah.
Which is higher risk with the alternative of delay.
Yes.
And both of which are costly.
Understanding that you might have to rethink your campaign. that is a possible potential outcome. Maybe the linear TV component, won't be as viable, or maybe you're going to have to shift away from a full product promotion into a reminder ad on TV. Now, reminder ads are apparently not at all being targeted or affected. And reminder ads have always been permitted in broadcast television. Pharma, the Pharmaceutical Researchers and Manufacturers of America, the trade group that represents the industry, has a set of guidelines on DTC communications that discourages the use of reminder ads on broadcast television and radio, but that is not the same as an FDA prohibition, right? That is an industry trade group that is saying, we think you shouldn't do this, it's not a good thing, but that's not the same as saying it's illegal or it violates the regulations. And so, that is always that is, as we speak, apparently still an option. I almost said that's always going to be an option, but given the situation we live in, who knows whether it's always going to be an option or not.
We don't know. So even an ad devoid of overt claims, therefore not necessitating the mountain of fair balance, seems like a viable option, but that
as we speak right now, it is a viable option.
Okay, so you're saying it is.
As of right now, it is a viable option.
I say seems just because of this envelope of uncertainty that is surrounding.
Well, that's where we need clarity from the FDA.
Right.
We need them to say, here's what we're doing, here's what the proposal is going to be, here's what it's going to look like, as well as giving us some sense for timing. If they're planning on, releasing a draft regulation, you would not immediately bring yourself into compliance with the draft regulation. You don't do that. Why don't you do that? Well, you don't do that because the regulation is not currently in force. And so
it could change. Again.
And it's a change. And you need to comply with the existing regulations, not with the regulations that are not yet in force. And typically you can't do both. So typically you have to choose, and the choice is always a no-brainer. You abide by the regulations that are currently in force. And the regulations that are currently in force have not yet changed. We have been told that there will be a change. When? I don't know. What will the change be? I don't know, right? But something is coming, right? And this gets back to that point of separating out the tremendous amount of, Sturm und Drang, right? The sound and fury around this announcement with what actually has happened. We will, I hope very soon, be able to start learning what FDA's new revised expectations are, or if indeed they are new revised expectations. One very, very real possibility is that we take a look at these new enforcement actions and we say, oh, this is just more enforcement. This isn't new enforcement, because the FDA has been taking enforcement actions for years, right? This is not a new thing.
But it's gone up and down.
He's just saying there's going to be more of it. Mm-hmm. Well, if it's just more of the same concerns, okay, that absolutely would be a good thing for us to learn. And again, as I said before, if you were thinking, oh, there's not that much enforcement, let's go ahead and let's so-called push the envelope. God, I hate that phrase. But let's do that, the chances of enforcement are so low, why not take a chance? Well, that would definitely then go into your calculation of thinking maybe that's not such a good idea after all. And again, that would in and of itself be good to know. For industry, if you want to comply, and my assumption always is, certainly the people who call me because they want to comply, right? You don't call me up and tell me, oh, Dale, we want to figure out how to break the rules, help me, because you're calling the wrong guy, right? So if you're calling a regulatory consultant or a lawyer to ask them how to comply with the rules, then you're doing so in good faith. You want to comply, and what you want from the government writ large, the FDA specifically, tell me what the rules are and I will comply with them. What we don't want is vague, the rules are shifting, we're not going to tell you what the new rules are yet, but eventually someday you will know. Until then, be on notice.
And with that, allow me for just a second to summarize your counsel, being that guy who wants to help companies, help pharmaceutical marketers in DTC remain compliant. So takeaway number one is the foundational rules, as far as we know, have not changed yet. Is that categorically true based on your...
As of this moment, when we are recording this podcast, that is true.
Okay.
But again, the minute we stop recording, there could be something posted, guidances could be withdrawn.
I just wanted to be crystal clear about that, because you're hearing a lot of people are panicking, and based on what was released to the public, the foundational rules of our business have not yet changed. I think that's an important statement, with the caveat that they could change 5 minutes after we cease conversing this morning.
And with the further caveat, the second caveat, that there has been an announcement that the rules will be changing. Right? The commissioner said they are initiating rulemaking to change this. Exactly how, exactly when, we don't know. But, we have been told that the rules will be changing.
So if you are in production or strategizing a new campaign based on these 3 provisos, if you will. Number one, the rules at this moment have not changed. However, they could change, and not only that, but the government has come right out and said that they will change, but we can't tell you when and how. So this engenders uncertainty, fundamental uncertainty in terms of how we can and should do business. And that's just the way it is right now.
And this goes to that core principle that, we talked about last time, the piece that I wrote a few months ago, talking about how you move forward during times of regulatory uncertainty. What industry always wants is certainty. What we have been given is massive amounts of uncertainty. You cannot just stop. What you have to do is you have to comply with the rules as they are right now, and you have to keep moving forward. Now, you might, once, you have to do so in a way that permits, nimble decision making in the future. So, you might have to rethink some of your options based upon the fact that we've got what, was famously described as a known unknown. By a former Secretary of Defense. We're in that territory where we know there is something out there that is going to happen, but we don't know what it is. So we have a known unknown.
Right. And
we know that there will be change.
The unknown of note is that the administration is intimating, already based on the issuance of new warning letters with a greater frequency than what we've been familiar with, that they are more stringent now, in the moment. Is that correct? So, okay.
Until we actually see the letters being issued, until we're able to take a look at those letters and see, is the FDA simply issuing more letters, i.e. enforcing the rules that are currently in place more stringently? Or is the FDA, through these new enforcement actions, actually changing their understanding of the rules? Until we see the letters, we won't know.
In either case, however, the government is paying a closer look to the industry
The
and
government has
acting
told us
than
they
they
are going
have been
to.
of late.
The government has told us they are going to be taking more enforcement.
Okay.
They have declared an intention to return to an age of 100+ warning letters and untitled letters being released every year. They have declared that intention. Releasing a dozen letters or 2 dozen letters, if it's 9 or 10 dozen letters, obviously that changes things. But we'll see, right? They have greatly reduced the head count in OPDP, the Office of Prescription Drug Promotion, that is responsible for issuing these letters.
Enforcement. Yeah.
So, I assume that the belief is that AI will be able to fill some of the vacuum, but until we see how it's being done and what it's being done, are we? There's too much that's unknown. That I can easily spin out tales about how this could go drastically wrong. If anybody has experience with AI, I used AI just the other day, well, a few weeks ago rather, and it made to take a look at a piece I had written and suggest some edits. And overall, it did a very good job. It also, though, told me that some of the things that I wrote were simply not true when they were true. So,
Well,
you have to be cautious.
We've had overt demonstrations as far as the bureaucracy goes. There's that famous story that DOJ recommended the termination of nuclear scientists and technicians critical to our nuclear capabilities, and they were fired and then rehired. So,
and more directly relevant, the first MAHA report cited fictional journal articles as support for the recommendations that were being put forth. So that's why people believe that AI was used in the generation of that first report, and that's part of the danger. We don't want things coming out from the government that create out of whole cloth fictional sources to back up their actions.
And then act on that. That's the second component. Right?
Yeah.
Right. Can I take just a second, because I've been getting a lot of scuttlebutt related not only to broadcast TV, but influencer marketing in social media. As we know, just like you mentioned, back in November of 2009, I believe, with the FDA hearings, you and I have been an organic part of this oscillating evolution in social media and healthcare communications. The rise of influencer marketing is substantive, and there's impact here too. The government, as far as I've seen the report, just like you mentioned, is intimating that they will come down much harder on the use of influencers, influencer messaging, and all of that. Can you comment on that from your Yoda eye view of things?
Yeah, I mean, the first part of it is the commissioner explicitly called out social media marketing and the use of influencers as being an area where they are going to be cracking down. So again, we need to see these letters. We need FDA to post these letters so that we can see exactly what are they doing. There has been, relatively speaking, quite a bit of enforcement in that area. And what do I mean by that? What I mean is, if you look at the total number of letters that we've gotten over the past few years, there have not been very many. The commissioner was right that enforcement has declined, but a significant percentage of all of the letters that we've gotten in the past few years have been focused on influencers. So the question we're again facing is, are we going to see exactly the same concerns that were being raised and being, taken enforcement on over the past few years? We're just going to see more enforcement because more people were doing exactly the same things but not receiving a letter? Or are they raising new concerns about that influencer marketing? Those two paths that they could be going down would have significantly different effects on what we as an industry do in response. If all we're seeing is more enforcement of the same things, okay, then we know what the rules are. We just have to be more stringent in our application. If, on the other hand, they're raising new concerns, well, then we have to alter our approach, right? And again, I hope in the very near future that perhaps when we finish recording this podcast, we will see that the letters have been posted. One never knows.
All right. Well, thank you for this. And again, I just think it's important to summarize key points because there's an awful lot going on right now. If you are a pharmaceutical marketer in the DTC space, the government's attitude toward DTC has shifted, apparently, in broad strokes. Although no formal rules have been changed, the government has overtly stated that they will change, but we don't know what those changes will be and when they will take effect. Is that correct?
I think you did a beautiful job of explaining exactly how deep and dense the fog is.
Great. So again, just not to be Chicken Little, but the sky hasn't fallen yet, but it seems to be kind of cloudy with meatballs up there.
Something is going to happen. So stay tuned to your Bald Ambition podcast. Stay tuned to New York Times, to Stat News, to all of your reputable sources of information. The Thompson Advertising reports. These are the things that you want to stay on top of, right? Make sure that you're following the developments because we have been told there will be developments.
Yeah, and that's really the best that we can do and fairly advise at this point, which is be transparent about the inherent uncertainty of this moment. And that's analogous. It's almost like welcome to the party, pal, pharma marketers, because look at the tariffs. The tariffs have sent American businesses, micro to macro, in a similar kind of tailspin due to uncertainty. And again, I'm not politicizing the moment. I'm just saying that this characteristic of inducing uncertainty across multiple verticals, inclusive of communications in healthcare, specifically DTC, is a product feature of this administration.
Yeah, and I think perhaps on our next chat, we should discuss not just this uncertainty, but the role of, these communications and why DTC is prevalent, why, it's used, and what its role is in the overall, communication sphere. There are definitely, concerns about it, and this uncertainty is real. But I don't expect pharmaceutical companies to stop engaging in DTC. I think DTC continues to play an important role in the overall healthcare, and we will see how this once the fog starts to clear. Have me back on. We'll talk about the new clear horizons. We'll try to figure out and navigate a path forward.
Yeah, and it'll be a pleasure. And this too shall pass one way or another. When the reciprocal tariffs were announced, the equity market oscillated literally by $4 trillion in about as many days. That's $4,000 billion. The only one happy about this were the Wall Street brokers and their commissions. But we survived. The market has rebounded. There's still tremendous uncertainty, but the only certainty now is uncertainty, and life goes on. So if there's any assurance, if you can call it that, to our fellow colleagues in Pharma DTC, you got to keep going, keep doing what you're doing, but with caution. And as Dale mentions, if you haven't been paying attention to the news, clicking refresh on an hourly basis, now's the time to do that, because literally we have no idea what's coming in 5 minutes or 5 months. But to the final point in this pod, something is coming. Thanks so much, Dale. We really appreciate your time and insights. I'll check back in with you maybe when the news breaks, or when it makes most sense to give, our fellow colleagues an update in this critical moment. We've been doing this for a long time, and it's like, wow, interesting times indeed. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Spitz. Have a great day.
Yeah.